A quick warning before we start. This and all other episodes in this series contain adult subject matter, including strong language and descriptions of violent and non-violent crimes. It may not be suitable for all audiences. Discretion is advised.
I'm fascinated with permaculture because in a small area of land you could produce a lot of food now. So I mean, you could take fish water and feed, water your plants. You can take your excess plants and feed it to certain animals. And there are people taking 1 acre pieces of land and feeding up to 50 people.
That was local activist and current candidate for La Paz County Sheriff Mike Roth on his 1 acre Quartzsite property. He's a firm believer in raising his own food and gave me the interview that you're about to hear while butchering chickens to thin the brood and fill the freezer. The very contentious story that we're about to hear is about how the town came to be. It's for these two reasons that I'm calling this episode The Fowl. Remember back in episode 1, Chaos Incorporated, when I mentioned that Mike Roth would detail the fallout from as far back as the incorporation of the town? I distinctly recall promising my listeners that story. It's a good one. Or maybe I should say it's a bad one. In fact, it's the one that set the town on a crash course to division and contention that they're finally starting to recover from with the new council that's in place today. I should apologize about my failure to deliver that podcast, but if you've been keeping up with the story, you'll know that I was derailed by threats, aggression, and derision from those who wish to see this story go untold. Come to think of it, several of those threats came directly or indirectly from people with strong ties to those earlier councils. So it's with little surprise that I began to more fully understand the struggle that the locals faced at the height of the more conflicted years. But here's the thing, the story has actually already been told. Or at least the worst parts of the story have been told. Newspaper reporters have swooped in to get the highlights of the more scandalous elements of the town's history and then returned home to sell a few newspapers on the backs of the locals fighting for their liberties. It was sent out over news and television broadcasts in at least 8 countries that I've been able to find in the research that I've conducted over the story's dissemination. But even if scandal, tight deadlines, and greedy managing editors weren't a factor in telling this story, the sheer size of it would ultimately have killed any possibility of telling it in its totality. I myself have spent nearly 2 years on it, and I'm having a hard time getting through it all. But this is no normal small-town community story. This is a story that would require an army of long-form journalists standing at the ready, dedicated to deciphering the backstories, the histories of the characters, and the depth to which this particular story delves. Even then, though, it would never be told on a schedule of feature news in the major media outlets. Only a mini-series, a podcast, and probably some other media that I'd like to release about it would actually be sufficient to get the fullness of the story out there.
When you parachute into a story like this, you're trying to figure out how far you can go in and still manage to get out alive. Not literally, but I can't make that my life. And so I kind of drew my line at the homicide. It was a good backdrop to what I was doing, but I was going to write about the dynamics of Quartzsite today and try to be aware of the conspiracy theories, but not get, because honestly, I mean, there were like 10 different major rabbit holes, and I just decided I can only go down the first one. I can't go into all the ancillary ones. It's brutal.
That was Dennis Wagner on the depth of the story, and he's right.
There were conspiracy theories in that town like popcorn at the circus.
Not only are there more conspiracy theories than in popcorn at a circus, some of them are actually supported by verifiable claims and documented facts throughout the years. In fact, here's a snippet of my thoughts on the subject from a news release that went on Parker Live Online. I'll be playing the radio interview I did with John Wright for the Parker Live Online's Listen segment for episode 9, with permission, of course. Full disclosure, though, John not only submitted footage for the upcoming film, but he's also acted as a point of contact for research going into the story's history. His footage dates back as far as 2011, when things were just starting to heat up in the town.
I've been covering Quartzsite a long time, and I think back in, it's got to have been 2011, I was hearing all of the, all of the same kinds of beats and all of the same kinds of stuff about local corruption and a corrupt police chief and this and that. And the tornado got so disruptive, or I guess so chaotic that I couldn't keep track of all the objects and where they were, and ended up sort of not being able to tell a coherent narrative. Have you licked that problem to a certain extent? I mean, do you think you've got a fairly good idea of what the story is, why it's happening, who are the heroes and villains and that kind of thing? Because I could never figure it out.
I think that I came in at just the right time. I believe I was at that stage at the early part of my time there. However, what I think you and a lot of reporters and just a ton of people I've interviewed did not have the benefit of having was a completed end to a lot of the stuff that was happening throughout that time anyway. A lot of them just weren't complete. Right. And a lot of times, there have been two instances where someone has, just before they died, admitted something that turned this story turned it
that's
stone
crazy.
over. Yeah, and so there's that. There's people that were holding on to stuff. Mayors have run through their succession and, been ousted, or, the change up has revealed other things, or, certain people got out of power that were holding records that were not going to be given out, and then they were given out. So a lot of things were getting in the way, and I do actually think that I have pinned it down. That was me kind of inferring that nearly every journalist that's come before me to Quartzsite has had two period-specific impediments to their ability to tell this story. The first is that the story was not finished. It was nowhere near over by the time previous filmmakers, reporters, and writers had covered their particular time slot in the striations of the town's staggered paroxysms. And the second was that important characters in the story had yet to emerge as key players that might otherwise not have had the opportunity to offer their stories. So let's start at the beginning. Here's Mike Roth, while pulling the guts out of a dead and feathered chicken, sitting on his butchering block, summarizing the main problem that the town faced.
Excuse me while I harvest the heart. My favorite part. Liver. Okay, so this goes in the trash. It's a nice town. It's horribly managed. It's run by a bunch of crooked politicians and a bunch of other parasites earning a paycheck that couldn't get a paycheck anyplace else. And a lot of these people come here because they can't go anywhere else, and they make the sacrifice to come to Quartzsite, and they impose their rules and ways of doing business and how to live life on us when they couldn't even do it where they're from. And that's why we've had the problems with politics here.
Asked how the town started, Roth said,
"The way this town got incorporated is wild, crazy, it's screwed up. What happened was they needed to get some kind of waste treatment system in here, and they decided the best way to do that was to create a town. I disagree. I think they could have created a sewage, a district, a water district, a sewer district. But they decided that they needed a town, a municipality. And of course that's good for real estate values. So they started, I believe, a referendum. And they need to get so many signatures to get people to agree to want to be governed with a new government. And so they started getting signatures, and this is out west Arizona, and this is 25 years ago, and we're pretty much libertarian views, conservative Western Arizona, Western values, and people weren't going for it. People are like, I don't want to incorporate this area. This place is great. We don't need more government. So they go out there and they get signatures. It's not working. They're not getting the signatures. So what they decided to do was stage a break-in of the office of the people who were doing it. Richard Oldham, Bob Cappy, and the newspaper guy, Jim Lloyd. So newspaper guy writes up a story. People break into Richard Oldham's office and steal all the signatures. Then they go out in town. People said, well, if that's the way they're going to play the game, I'll sign that thing. And that's how they got the signatures to incorporate Quartzsite. It all started on a lie. It's not gotten any better since.
I heard that they did it over the summer when nobody was around.
They always do it over the summer when nobody's around. The people clearly at first weren't for it, but they had to create this story to get people angry. And it worked. We got a town. It's been a disaster from the beginning. I don't know if there's a way to unincorporate it. If there is, I'm all for it. I've talked about it. Most other people aren't for it because they've got all their excuses and reasons.
Like all small towns, we have, to use the expression of our town attorney at the time, we have a great white swimming instead of a shark in an ocean in a swimming pool. Like big fish in a little pond, we have a great white in a swimming pool.
That was former town manager Alex Taft. She was referring to the town's infamous founder and, not incidentally, its first mayor, Richard Oldham. When I asked him what his motivation was for starting the town, he said,
"They called me the founding mayor because I worked real hard to get the town incorporated. Mostly for water and sewer is what my object was."
Here's longtime resident Dick Cloud confirming that statement.
The community needed water, and we needed a sewer system. And that's why we incorporated.
Then there's Alex's take on that claim.
You know the classic car business that's here in town, all those classic cars that are around? Well, that was the person that really drove this town for a long time. And that's the energy that drove what happened.
That's like the source of it.
Yes.
This, my friends, is the pivotal moment in the story when you find out the motivating factor that sets all the other parts of the story into motion. In other words, it's the fulcrum upon which the main tenets of the story oscillate. Why won't anybody just say that? It seems like a pretty easy thing to say.
Because he's still lurking out there and he's litigious.
He sued his mother at one time. But keep in mind, Richard don't have anything. Everything Richard owns is in a trust. And so if you check with the Secretary of State, you'll find there's a lot of people sued Richard over it. But they can't get anything because it's protected with the trust.
He sued his own mother. He got into his mother's, he robbed his mother's account. Oh yeah, the guy is a real highbinder. And she sued him after he pilfered her retirement account.
You have to be careful about what you say and how you say it.
Do you mind saying who that was?
I'd rather not.
Okay. Do you feel comfortable saying who that is?
I'd probably rather not say it.
Fair enough.
With Richard Oldham, I wouldn't even want to try to venture a guess or a comment.
I've seen all the paperwork. I've seen it from day one, and I've known this is the situation, and he knows I know it.
So it's fear, not putting themselves out there. It's an actual fear.
Yeah, I would say it probably is.
And you think that fear is legitimate because of litigious reasons or because of actual harm?
Well, in my mind, it's litigious reasons, but in other people's minds, it may not be. It may be hardcore physical reasons. I don't know. But in my mind, it's more litigious because that's how I dealt with Oldham, was through litigation.
There was a huge amount of fear that we had to battle.
Richard did a real good job in the very beginning. And then he caused several lawsuits against the town. And the town, I think, is still suffering for it to this day.
A lot of towns have this. You know, they've got the big wheel. And that big wheel is used to doing things in a certain way. And the more you grow up as a town, the more accountability is involved, the more planning and zoning gets involved, code enforcement, and all those other things. All of it combines to create more oversight, more eyes on the situation. So that big fish in a little pond can't do what they used to do as easily. And so what does the big fish in the little pond do? He tries to control that oversight. If that doesn't work, then he tries to fragment it.
I asked her what the most impactful contributing factor was to the change in the town's government.
That great white wanted certain things to happen and was used to doing certain things a certain way. And when life made that great white accountable, that person didn't like it and set in motion a whole bunch of other things, most of which were destructive, all of which camouflaged what the great white was doing.
So, are you talking about the chief or are you talking about the mayor?
Neither.
Oh. No, I'm intrigued. Alex is one of the earliest of my interviews. In fact, based on the date of my original audio files, I think she was my second interview. I was supposed to visit John Gudekunst, who is a reporter for the Parker Pioneer, but I got a flat tire heading out of town, and she was available that afternoon. I didn't fully realize the impact of the water treatment plant at that time, but I had an inkling that it did play an important role in the story. Recalling my conversation with Alex Taft, who does an almost philosophical job of detailing with extreme accuracy the history and occurrences in the town, and of course, what the meanings of those historical implications translate to in terms of reality, I asked her what was the most important or impactful contributing factor.
The one that jumps out is the sewer plant. He wanted it. He wanted the sewer.
A new one, not a fixed one?
No, he wanted the sewer. He wanted to own it.
Here's retired Quartzsite resident Lou Wilkinson, who's had his finger on the pulse of the town since the 1980s. Why would he want to own the water and sewer plant?
Big money. Money.
We'll hear more from him later. But still, why would someone want to own the sewer, I wondered. The answer isn't so obvious to people who don't live in Quartzsite, but it's clear as day for those who do, and it harkens back to the story's main pillars, the history, the location, and the characters. Here's Arizona Republic reporter Dennis Wagner.
Well, there's no question that in Arizona, particularly in desert communities of Arizona, water has premium value, and the control of water has huge economic and political importance.
There's another facet to it, though, that not only compiles the issue, but multiplies its importance in this story, as well as its importance to the town many times over. Because each winter, while the rest of the nation is shoveling snow off their driveways and navigating icy streets in their early morning drives to work, Quartzsite is sunny and balmy. What's that got to do with the water plant? Here's Lieutenant Gray, Norm Simpson, and Marie talking about the winter influx.
During our peak season, which is January, February, we see an influx of 100,000 to 250,000 people over a course of a month or 2 months.
One of the most difficult things to run is utilities that are not constant.
When I was younger, it went to 1.5 million people that would come to Quartzsite.
When many American businesses are closing their doors for the winter, Quartzsite explodes onto the scene as a destination for 4x4 clubs, motocross riders, RV travelers, even nudists come out to enjoy the warm solitude of the flat earth escaping into the horizon in every direction. And with this influx of visitors, of course, comes the influx of money.
Quartzsite comes out of a dead sleep and wakes up big time.
But it goes from real peace and quiet for a long period of time to chaos for a shorter period of time. And I like both seasons. I always tell people we have 2 seasons, snakes and snowbirds. Right now, snakes is the much longer season. You get a noticeable difference in the increase in business. Town almost like doubles and doubles. By the middle of the second week in town, it is booming. Then the shows start, And for 2.5 weeks, it is a money mill.
And the money that Paul's referring to just then, both metaphorically and literally, flows right through the town into its water treatment plant. So essentially the town's water system has always been seen as a money-making entity.
And again, it had to do with the sewer. It's been the sewer from day one. So you asked me what caused the real fragmentation that everybody saw. It was looked at as a money-making concern.
That was Taft again. What she said was echoed in several other interviews, and this is where the water treatment plant becomes an extremely important part of this story. But it was a double-edged sword, where on one side the economy soars and the town's merchants make their entire year's income in a few short months, but on the other hand, their water treatment plant was only originally built for 3,500 residents. Here again is Mayor Simpson.
The amount of volume you need to handle during the summer compared to the winter is enormous. When you think that a lot of these people are dry camping out on the desert, it's also illegal for them to dump their holding tanks out on the desert. So they hit all of the RV pit stop and the various places around town, or they'll go into an RV park, stay one day, dump their holding tank, and then go back out and dry camp. So you have this huge increase of volume to the wastewater plants all at once, during the winter months. You have to be able to handle that capacity, but then again, during the summer, the off months, you don't have enough volume to keep the plant operating.
3,000 people in the summer is not really feasible.
So do you shut down the plant and haul sludge to Blythe and pay them to process it? Or do you downsize your plant, operate it during the winter, and then try to increase the volume through Blythe or somebody else? This is all the battles that go on how do you do it.
Speaking further about the trouble in Population Paradise, here's Alex talking about her knowledge as the town's bookkeeper on environmental files dating back to the 1970s.
When I was first hired by the town, I was hired just to put their paperwork together. Because when they first formed, it was in 1989, and they had a room just ceiling to floor with boxes, and they didn't even know what they had. They said, fix it. So I did, and I went through, and what it really came down to was the sewer. It was the sewer that drove the whole situation, because this town was scattered with loads of septic tanks and nitrate plumes and all kinds of problems that it happens in the desert. You start out with one or two trailers in a plot of land, then somebody splits the land and splits it again, and you wind up with all these sewer tanks, and not all of them are working properly, and then underground gas tanks, and sometimes they leak and yada yada. So bottom line is we became visible to the ADEQ, Arizona Department of Environmental Quality. And they issued a "thou shalt not put another septic tank in here until you address the problem of what you're going to do."
You've got safety issues here. OSHA was in here too and said you've got safety issues in your water treatment plant, your sewer plant.
Quartzsite's mainly on septic, and there are problems with some underground pollution and other things resulting from that, and the federal government has said you cannot install any new systems. You either have to upgrade your treatment plant or no growth. So for the community to grow constructively, we need to improve the sewer plant.
We had to do something to get that fixed and repaired, because otherwise the state was going to take over one of our sources of income.
This was no secret for the residents of the town. Even if it wasn't in all the newspapers all over the country, the town had started some very strange practices regarding the billing of water and sewer bills.
When you are running a town and running a budget, to keep that budget on track, you have to match your income to your expenses. And they went close to 10 years without adjusting their water or wastewater rates. When you do that, then you have to do an adjustment that's so large that people panic, and it's something that they can't adjust to 1 or 2% at a time. But when you start hitting them with 20% or 30% increase on their utilities in one crack, that's hard to adapt to. And that's what had happened. One town manager just didn't do things timely, and it got to a point where it built up to where it became a panic situation. The town needed the money. The town, to pay for the inadequacy of its income, borrowed $2.6 million of highway user funding from gasoline tax. When Loretta and I first got on the council, we started working on that debt, and to this day that $2.6 million has been repaid.
Asked about where the power struggle started in town, Alex said,
originally in this town there were like 7 different families. Or was it? No, it was 5. Hawkins, Cloud, Oldham, Bird, and Tran. Of all of them, they're gone, except for Oldham and Tran.
Oldham was one of those families, some say. And by those same reports, Richard took his family's fortune and invested it in his own future as a politician there. I'm going to pause for a moment here and make note that Alex actually stopped herself in revealing the full 7 families that originated in Quartzsite.
Originally in this town there were like 7 different families. Or was it? No, it was 5.
What emerged upon my research was not just important because of the other 2 families playing important roles in the town's history, but also Taft's knowledge of the ties those families have to this story. Firstly, the Scotts and the Cowles were the other 2 families.
And there was another, and I keep being told this is a female, but her name is Alex. Do you know?
Yes.
Okay. I can't seem to find her, and I'm trying to track her down too to see if she might be interested as well. Do you know how to contact Alex?
I do have a phone number for her.
For obvious privacy reasons, I'm stopping the clip there, but that was Barbara Cowell. We'll only hear from her a little bit in the story because she was very cagey. At any rate, the Scotts we've already heard from, and incidentally, or at least I assume it was incidental, Barbara Cowell, of the other prominent family in town, served on the town council when Alex Taft was the town manager.
You were also, as I understand it, and actually I don't understand it very well, so correct me if I'm wrong, but I heard that you were part of the town council a few years ago?
About 6 years ago.
Okay.
Even though Barbara married into the Cowell name, it still goes back just as far as the others. Their family name is literally engraved in the town, both in the cemetery as well as being emblazoned on one of the street signs.
Your name is literally on one of the streets here, as I've heard.
Yes, my husband's family's been here since 1916.
This connection is also important because Barbara was not just a very vocal supporter of the establishment side of the council during the town's more recent years of contention, but also a real estate agent who, as Ed Foster claims, just happens to have come upon some free land during those years. That free property, Foster told me, came from a contractor that the town had a history with. The clip you're about to hear came on the heels of a statement Ed Foster made confirming Norm Simpson's allegations that ex-Chief Gilbert had ties with the drug cartels.
Norm made the claim that the Chief Gilbert was on the take from the cartels. Was that true?
I think so, yeah.
What base would you have?
He also owns businesses in Phoenix.
Chief.
And he wasn't above that. He owned a house over here in town. When I got to be mayor, he lived out in Rainbow Acres on the other side of the mountain over there. And that's not in Quartzsite. And he needed a house in town. And he actually him and Johnson and Barbara Cowell extorted property from this developer that was, you know where the senior center is over there? Where when you go out to Norm's restaurant?
Okay.
That's street. There's senior centers right there at the beginning of it, sort of. And where the senior center across the road over here and across the intersection, there's a section of property, and all three of them got property in that for free from that contractor. He actually got forced out of town.
Was this generous gift the result of actions Barbara Cal voted on during her time in the council? When I originally called her, this was among the allegations that I had planned to ask her. But without even knowing what I wanted to interview her about, she refused to talk.
Hello, this is Barbara.
Hi, Barbara. My name is Kyle O'Donnell. I'm a documentary filmmaker, and I'm shooting a documentary around Quartzsite currently. Finding out more about Quartzsite, I've ended up staying here for the last few weeks to shoot a variety of different shots and the people, and it just seems to keep getting more and more quirky and fun. So I'm just kind of chasing it down the rabbit hole. And your name came up as somebody who might be good to interview as well. And I was curious if you might possibly want to interview.
No, I'm pretty busy. I do know a lot about Quartzsite, but I'm really, really busy right now because I'm a realtor. So
sure.
No.
But back to Richard Oldham. Arizona Republic staff reporter Mark Schaefer wrote on page B8 of his December 12, 1991 article, quoting then Mayor Rex Byrd, saying, quote, Oldham ran for La Paz County Supervisor and got beat, and then said he would bring the county down, end quote. He went on to say that, quote, Oldham had conned people into signing the petition for the incorporation election and got it on the ballot in May, when only his people were here, and after all our winter residents had left, end quote.
It all started on a lie. It's not gotten any better since.
I heard that they did it over the summer when nobody was around.
They always do it over the summer when nobody's around. The people clearly at first weren't for it, but they had to create this story to get people angry. And it worked. We got a town. It's been a disaster from the beginning.
One of the interviewees I've already interviewed said that the actual incorporation was kind of a scam as well.
It was.
Could you tell me about that?
Well, Quartzsite should never have been incorporated because the incorporators knew very well that they had no way of funding it after they incorporated it because statutorily Quartzsite cannot collect property taxes. They have to rely solely on sales tax revenues.
Uh-huh.
So they were at a decided disadvantage from the get-go. When Quartzsite was formed in April, prior to the 15th, the place emptied out. The summers, you could fire a cannon down Main Street. There's nobody there. Plus the heat's 120 some days.
Those clips were from interviews with Mike Roth and Bob Miller. They confirmed the news article's claim. In effect, Rex Byrd's statement was backed up. Unfortunately, we won't hear from Rex Byrd because he lost his battle with cancer shortly after he was released and ultimately exonerated from a felony charge of conspiring to kill Richard Oldham. This was shortly after he'd ousted Richard Oldham in the town's first of quite a few mayoral recalls. This happened in 1993. The two quotes from Schaefer's article, lined up back-to-back in the same paragraph of that article, will form the basis for this and the next few podcasts as I move through the discussion of not only how the town started, but why its first few years were so rocky. I'll start with the first quote. That will be the one about how Oldham lost his bid for county supervisor. According to county records, Byrd was quoted correctly. In the late 1980s, Oldham had gone from a wealthy land prospector and RV park owner to having his sights set on the county seat. And Rex would have first hand of that knowledge, because at that time, according to witness reports and newspapers, Byrd and Oldham weren't just close friends. They were also business partners. Here's another of their older friends, Dick Cloud.
In the beginning, we all supported Richard. We was basically all friends, even Rex Byrd. Rex Byrd was a ex-contractor. He was a 32 or a 33-degree Mason. Honest man. Good guy.
I'm going to spend some time talking about Oldham's history in the town, which ties into his move to not only engage in politics, but also to make a move to control the town itself. A big move. A move that changed the course of history for the entire county. Here's Chief Ponce and Paul Weiner.
Richard Oldham is a long-time resident of Quartzsite. He's probably like a third or fourth generation Quartzsite resident. His family's been around here forever.
He goes way, way back.
Very powerful man, very political.
What happened in Quartzsite is an unpopular man years ago got elected as first mayor. In his dealings with being the mayor of the town, he wanted to get a better water system plan for the town. He also included his property. So there's been unrest ever since the town became a town.
They weren't kidding. Looking through the historical record of the town's earliest residents, I found newspapers as far back as 1916 that referenced the Oldham family. And Richard himself was no stranger to the newspapers growing up. He appeared in the October 28, 1955 edition of the Arizona Republic, which noted him as the student vice president at Siloam High School, the school all Quartzsite High School students attended because they didn't have one in town. And they actually still don't. Siloam is the nearest town up the highway. Oldham would go on to enjoy fast cars, fast women, and even his own private pilot's license. He'd use that to traverse between California, Arizona, and other regional states throughout the Southwest. In the April 1st, 1965 edition of the Arizona Republic, Oldham was recorded as placing below the top 5 racers in a 1958 Chevy. His once wife, the newspaper reported, was the cover model for a major American whiskey label. Throughout the course of my interviews, which at this point total 64 people from nearly a dozen Arizona towns, there were only 2 people that defended Mr. Oldham's character. The first was John Wright, who spent a day driving around with Oldham on a tour of the desert somewhere around the early 2010s. The other was actually Jennifer Jones, who simply qualifies him as a stringent businessman. But I have to say, I didn't meet a more cagey, paranoid, or skittish person in all of the interviews for this film. And I formed that opinion before I'd heard anyone talk about how right I was about those impressions. Alex Taft, of course, gave me a pretty good idea, and on the issue of full disclosure, I did actually meet her before I met him for the first time, and perhaps that impacted my first reaction. However, I'd eventually go on to interview Jenny Mills, who said,
"Even Richard will only give you what you want to hear." Yeah.
I asked her what might prompt Richard to act so paranoid.
I think Deborah, maybe. You'll never get information out of Deborah. She's a smart cookie. She won't tell you nothing. Well, also, if he had his phone sitting there, Deborah was listening to everything, and he probably had an earplug in with her telling him.
In fact, Richard was still sitting there with his phone still on.
They record everything. They thought I was recording them, but I never did.
Is the camera on now?
It's physically on.
Are you recording now?
Yes.
They're probably the most 2 paranoid people in Quartzsite. Them too, and they really don't have any reason to be.
Richard thinks everybody's after him. And he's probably got the right to think that. But it's an illusion. Nobody's after Richard. Nobody wants him. Nobody's going to kill him. Nobody wants to hurt him.
The mayor tried to kill me and missed. So it was a mess.
Speaking of nobody wanting to hurt him, there was apparently a contract taken out on him, yeah?
And that was bullshit.
Yeah. And this, of course, put Deborah on my radar.
She was running from somebody when she came to Quartzsite. Well, Deborah came to town dragging a horse trailer and a kid. And when she came to town, I was one of the first people she contacted. She was looking for work. So I agreed to meet her at the truck stop there. And we had a talk, and I thought, well, okay, we'll give it a try. Because anybody that appears halfway decent is hard to find in Quartzsite, And I thought, well, let's give it a try. And she knew a lot she didn't want to tell me about. So she went on her separate way. And I don't know how she ever got tangled up with Oldham, but they deserve each other. They're She when she came to town, she had more names than they called her 1,000 names. She went by Deborah Ireland for a while, and then there was Deborah this and Deborah that, and nobody ever did figure out what her real name was.
But even if I'd never interviewed with these folks, I'm sure I'd still have a similar impression of Oldham's character, because beside the fact that during our interview, when I'd come back into the office from grabbing a replacement mic cable from the car, I'd catch him scrambling to the phone to hang up or being dodgy with his initial comments. This audio clip was recorded after I'd set up my camera and had it recording while I was out. Unfortunately, it only captured Oldham setting up his Facebook chat so he could have it open during our interview.
Right?
No. Did you hear a word I said?
Yes. But I got this damn Facebook thing is going again.
Turn it on again.
Camera off, mute, mute's not on, flip, end. I don't want to end, do I? Conversation with D. Oh, there's a little D. Is that how do I turn that thing off?
That's for the first time for you.
It was right here when I realized that I wasn't the only one doing an interview.
Camera off.
Yes.
That does it?
Now it should be a regular call.
Oldham was attempting to turn the camera off of his Facebook chat, where he was recording video while I was out of his office, and his assistant helped him get the chat to a, quote, regular call.
Just got this smartphone.
Oldham was clearly no master of technology.
Now you did it. Are you there?
Yeah.
Oh, good.
This went on for a while. When he set his phone down, I inquired as timidly as I could about what Deborah might have been saying.
Okay.
Everything all right?
Yeah. It's cold.
All I heard was negative stuff about Quartzsite. What was the...
Well, we're trying not to hurt Quartzsite in any way, so that's their point.
If nothing else, though, he also refused to sign what was essentially a very standard single-page media release. And I'm not saying he politely shied away. I'm saying he gave me every excuse in the book not to sign a release that didn't grant me any rights to manipulate what he said. In the next episode, I'll talk about how Oldham's paranoia was both validated and not validated in a town that ultimately dislikes him, but doesn't want him dead as he might claim. And of course, in true Quartzsite flair, nearly every story has some kind of evidence backing both sides, depending on who you talk to, of course. For now, I'll end this episode at the moment when, after 40 minutes of attempting to convince Oldham to sign the release, he gives me, from his own mouth, verbal permission for that interview.
So, because you can ask me questions on the street or anywhere, and I answer them, no problem.
And he said if they feel comfortable
But
with that, then that's fine.
with this, man, I always have to say, let's see now, am I busting that agreement by doing what I'm doing? Or, because I've sold quite a bit of property around here and done very well.
Okay.
So I just don't want to put it in jeopardy, I guess.
I don't know what to tell you about that. That's...
Well, maybe I'm over playing my hand a bit. But anyway, I'm perfectly willing to answer questions or whatever you want to do.
We're currently in the funding phase to help complete the film that inspired this podcast. With your donation, you'll get a free copy of the film when it's released. Visit legallyinsanefilms.com for more information, to support the film, to download your own copies of this and other media, and to reach out with your own stories of true crime and corruption. Thanks for listening to this episode of Big Trouble in Little Quartzsite. I'm your host, Kyle O'Donnell. We'll see you next time. Big Trouble in Little Quartzsite has been a production of Legally Insane Films, LLC.